it is possible to build a spin-stabilized shell that fires down a smooth-bore barrel. The idea comes from the Congreve rocket, which was produced roughly in the 1790s or so, beginning in Britain. The Congreve rocket was a rocket which had three motors at the back, three nozzles at the back, each of which, instead of going straight back, was canted slightly at an angle, so that as it was pushing the rocket forward, it also spun the rocket. They were fired from a V-shaped trough, and they didn't work. They were horrendous weapons. They were intended to be used in places where you couldn't carry artillery, such as mountain warfare. There were hilarious stories of them coming off the trough and going vertical. There were even stories of them going partially flying towards the target and then spinning around and coming back towards the gun crews. They were extremely inaccurate. They didn't have a very large explosive load. They had a gunpowder charge that was supposed to detonate at the end. And because of the poor accuracy and the small charge, they almost never did any significant damage. But this can be used to rotate an artillery shell. At the back of the shell, there would be an extension which has tubes canted at an angle with propellant charges. When the pellet of the gun fires, the shell starts moving up the barrel. You might want to have plastic blocks in front of the propellant so that the propellant will ignite a little bit after the shell starts moving. That way you're dealing with sliding friction instead of static friction. And then you need enough rotational energy to overcome friction in the barrel and have an adequate rate of rotation at the muzzle. To calculate the amount of energy you want in the shell, you need what is known as the second moment of inertia. For a uniform disc, which a shell isn't, but as a first approximation, the second moment of inertia is 1/2 mass times the radius squared. A 155mm artillery shell weighs about 100 pounds. You have to convert it into a unit known as slugs in the US Common System, previously known as the English system of units. The acceleration of gravity is about 32.2 feet per second. You divide the 100 by the gravity, so you get about 3 slugs. A 155 shell is about 6 inches in diameter, so it's about 3 inches in radius. So you square that, 9 times 1/2, 4.5 times the 3 slugs, and you get 13.5 slug inch squared. The rotational energy of an object is 1/2 the second moment of inertia times omega squared. Omega is the radians per second of rotation. If it's a 50 caliber barrel for a 6-inch shell, that would be 25 feet long. If you assume that is 1/4 of a rotation, then the rotational length is 100 feet. If it's traveling at 2,800 feet per second, that's 28 rotations per second. Square that, you get 800, give or take. But you also need to multiply by 2 pi squared. That's 40. That's 32,000 times the 13.5 slugs. But there's also the factor of 1/2. So the 32,000 becomes 16,000 times 13.5, and you have something around 220,000. The units are slug inch times inch over second squared. A pound of explosive or a pound of propellant, which are similar, have about 20 million pound inches of energy per pound of explosive. To convert slug inch times inch over second squared into pound inches, the number has to be divided by 12. Now you get 20,000 slug foot inch per second squared, or 20,000 pound inches, which is 1/1000th of a pound of explosive. A pound is about 450 grams. You're looking at half a gram. Now, it's nowhere near efficient. So you're going to need a larger amount of propellant. Even if you say 5 grams to allow for gross inefficiencies, that's still a tiny amount of propellant to spin the shell. Even in the high pressure environment of the barrel of the gun, which can be 22 to 30,000 pounds per square inch, you're still getting a net transfer of momentum when those propellant charges fire, and that will cause the rotation of the shell. The gun used in many tanks is the Rheinmetall 12 centimeter, 120 millimeter smooth-bore cannon. For attacking tanks, it has what is known as an APFSDS round, armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot. It is a penetrator, which looks like a big dart. It has a concentrated metal center core and then fins at the back, taking up the space between the dart and the walls of the tube, or what we refer to as sabots. And they attach onto the penetrator. They take up the space between the tube, and they allow the propellant gases to force the projectile at very high speed down the tube. It's much lighter than a conventional shell, and so its muzzle velocity is much higher. There is another variety of penetrator called the APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot, or dispersing sabot. This is used in a rifle barrel. This is what the British have used in their 120 millimeter guns. It has just a rod, but it's spun. In the AP FSDS, the stabilization is provided by fins at the back. This is stabilized by being spun. This kind of round can be fired down a smooth bore barrel using the same concept. You would have the impulse generators that would spin the APDS round fitted to the sabots. They would go down the barrel, they would disperse. It would behave just like a conventional APDS round. The British also have a round that they call HESH, high explosive squash head. It's a high explosive round that kind of flattens out when it hits a target, and then it detonates. It sends a shock wave through the target, and it causes material on the inside of the target wall to spool off. That shell works best when being spun. You could fire that shell down the smoothbore barrel, again, using the same concept of the impulse generators. So that smoothbore tube can fire any smoothbore round and any spun round. That gives a great deal of flexibility in the design of projectiles. The US Navy uses 5-inch guns on its ships. And again, down that barrel, down that tube, you can fire spun rounds, fin-stabilized rounds. A wide variety of projectiles can be fired using the same concept of the momentum generator on the back of the shells.